Pozdravljeni, dobrodošli na okrogli mizi, ki smo jo naslovili Sokrivda, medijev pri genocidu nad palestinskim ljudstvom. Organiziramo jo pekarna Magdalenske mreže, ampak to že veste, ker ste se znašli tukaj. Pogovor bo, kot je bilo napovedano, potekal v angleškem jeziku. Vkolikor bi po pogovoru želeli imeti kakšna vprašanja ali komentarje in ne želite govoriti v angleščini, lahko vprašate tudi v slovenščini, pa bom jaz prevedla. Velja? So welcome everybody and a special welcome to our guests. Today we will spend hopefully a few hours together, not only with discussion between us sitting here, but also with you. So this is a roundtable discussion entitled Media's Complicity in Genocide over Palestinian People. And with me here today are guests, Palestinian journalist Abir Kopty. Abir is a journalist working with Middle East Eye and with many other news outlets. Before she at the moment she's living in Germany. Before she was living in Ramallah and Haifa and Nazareth. Yeah, she was born in Nazareth. And then next to her is Borisom Vasevom. He's a journalist with MMC Slovenia, so the online web portal by public broadcasting house RTV. And Kristino Božič, a lawyer and journalist with Missionets and Z Network. So welcome and thank you for joining us. As all of you are very eloquent and articulate and have written and spoken a lot about the topics that we are going to discuss today, I think that I would just pose the first question and then you can discuss among yourselves. But no, maybe we always need to start as we have for now more than a year. It's good to remember and to let the following information sink in. By now we know that more than 44,000 Palestinian people have been killed by Israeli forces with the weapons from USA, UK, Germany, Italy and also Slovenia, as we found out also lately that more than 11,000 are missing, more than 100,000 are wounded, and latest, as you all know, latest report by United Nations says that 70% of the people killed, murdered, were women and children. We know that a lot of children have died by being shot with the snipers have shot children directly, so intentionally. And we also know that there is more than 17,000 children dead. However, there are not only governments that are complicit in the genocide, some more than others, but there are also media corporations, also public broadcasting media complicit in this. Craig Mukiber, a former senior UN official, has a few months ago written an article debating this and also researching how would it be possible to sue the big media corporations and public media for complicity in genocide. A lot has been written about, in certain circles of course, about the way that media reports on this genocide and before that on decades of occupation and apartheid. And I would just for the beginning like to mention, and thank you Christina for sending me this information, that Muhammad El-Masri recently did a quantitative content analysis featured in Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly that provides concrete measurable evidence that mainstream Western broadcast news outlets demonstrate significantly more sympathy towards Israeli victims and violence perpetrated by Israel than Palestinian victims and perpetrated violence. The study analyzed more than 400 Instagram posts, including still images, captions, and videos from CNN, BBC News, Fox News, MSNBC, and Sky News. In every category of Instagram posts, still images, captions, and videos, the outlets employed significantly more Israeli and pro-Israeli sources than Palestinian and pro-Palestinian ones. So this is just for the beginning. But now let me start with this question that is like quite easy to answer, but still I think is really important that we hear this information many times. So in the media that you are familiar with, that you read or follow, how much space do the media corporation and public broadcasting services provide to Palestinian or now also Lebanese voices, and how much to Israeli? And this is a question for all of you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for organizing this event. So the analysis you have mentioned, I have to also say that there were many analyses actually conducted by different media outlets or researchers or institutions about the bias in the Western media. And of course, it's important also to say that when we talk about the most the Western media, that we just want to refer to like the most powerful in the most powerful countries like the US, Britain, France, and Germany. Those analyses also showed the very similar results, where most, like I can mention a few of them, but on the New York Times, on the BBC, on the Canadian also news outlets, on how they, of course, preferred Israeli narrative, how they preferred Israeli and pro-Israeli voices. The bias is so like blatant and out there that even I think a reader, normal reader, would notice this. I think if reader would only see those news outlets, they would think that Israel is the victim. They would think that there is no genocide happening. They would not know the political context of what happened the last year, because this is not a isolated event than the 76 of colonization and annihilation of the Palestinian people and ethnic cleansing and land grab and massacres and killing and imprisonment children and people and men and torture in prison. There is a whole context that is completely absent in those media outlets. But luckily, there are many alternative sources of information nowadays that the last year has, whatever they have done, they couldn't really conceal what is happening, and people saw it with their own eyes, with the social media, with alternative media outlets and independent sources. It's out there and they cannot hide it. I think also that it is not just about like the bias that they prefer or they give more space to Israel and pro-Israeli voices, but it's also about repeating the Israeli talking points, and it's embedded in almost every article that they write. And I can just give a few examples because I think it's very important that when we read news, those news outlets, we read with scrutiny, we read with more critical thinking, we read between the lines what they are trying to convey to us, and what they have been doing for the last 1 year and 2 months is manufacturing consent around what Israel is doing, around the genocide, though they won't call it genocide. There were few, I will just mention shortly and pass it over to my colleagues, but let's take, for example, there are a few talking points that are being repeated all the time in those news outlets. Let's start with the most, I call it the most evil propaganda in this genocide, and it's the line of human shields, that Hamas uses people as human shields, that Hamas hides between civilian people, and that Hamas builds tunnels under schools and hospitals. And that was from day one. And I will not forget that the BBC, just in the first 2 weeks, wrote an article titled, "Does Hamas hide or build tunnels under schools and hospitals?" And that was a point that set the narrative where every crime Israel will commit will be justified by this narrative. And the media helped create this narrative. Not that the BBC verified this information, because the BBC does not have journalists over in Gaza, because we remind ourselves that Israel banned foreign journalists from being there. So media outlets had the audacity to rewrite, and to repeat every single Israeli talking point without verifying. And yet, whenever they want to talk about Palestinian victims or like the crimes Israel is doing, in many cases they would say we could not independently verify. So this, double standards in dealing with this news and information. So the human shields, and then if you remember the next one, because there is always something, the next one was to claim to cast doubt on the numbers of victims with using the talking point that Hamas-led Ministry of Health, because each time the Ministry of Health will release the number of victims in Gaza, people killed, maimed, families wiped out, etc., most of the those media outlets repeated immediately the Israeli talking point, and each time they would mention the number of the victims, when they want to mention them, it always comes with Hamas-led Ministry of Health, and what does it mean to the general public when they read it? They immediately think with doubt about these numbers. Even though every single UN organizations and many human rights organizations has testified that these numbers in previous experiences with the Ministry of Health in Gaza have proven to be right and accurate. But still, the media would continue until today, by the way. Some of them until today are still repeating this talking point. And there were other talking points. So it's not just the amount of information, but also like the way they repeat undoubtedly without challenging the Israeli talking points and adopting them in order to manufacture consent and justify Israeli crimes.
BBC is an excellent example on how not to report on this question, and it really strikes me every time when I hear a colleague of mine or any colleague say that BBC represents a lighthouse in the field of journalism, and it should be an example to strive towards. I'm not sincerely in shock because I know what's going on, but it's kind of surprising that people don't see, that journalists don't see through this facade of professionalism on behalf of BBC. And there are numerous examples. For example, when they're talking with quote-unquote pro-Palestinian guest about something, and the guest states, for example, a fact or an opinion about Israeli war crimes, the BBC journalist or presenter always has, and I think this is an instruction that they get. They always have to defend the Israeli side. They have to follow up with saying, of course, the Israeli government denies attacking civilians intentionally or something like that. It's not the job of a journalist to defend one or the other side. You can either have the guest and let them defend their own position or not, or state something maybe factual. But they're taking the position of advocates for the Israeli side, which obviously never happens for the other side. And it's not only, you started, Dushka, with asking how much space do the media give to Israelis and to Palestinians, I think. And this is one metric, but it's not enough, because, for example, now, when we look at the divide between Gaza and the West Bank, especially now with what's going on in Gaza, a lot of times the media gives, for example, the platform to a minister or to an ambassador of the PA, for example, in London. He doesn't represent Hamas, he doesn't represent the people of Gaza. In a way he can, because he's the minister of the official government, or the ambassador. But the journalists don't delve into this divide between Gaza and the West Bank. So you have, for example, you have three sides here, not only two sides. You have the Israeli side, you have the official PA side, the Palestinian Authority side, and then you have the Hamas side, if we just look at the political actors. And Hamas is never represented. So you're talking about representing the position of the people of Gaza, but you're talking to the adversaries of Hamas, which represent the people of Gaza. So it's not only how many Palestinians do you talk to, but which Palestinian do you give the voice to. There are other, I mean, this is just one thing that the media does. You always hear, for example, and you often have, especially in BBC, they give a lot of space to official spokespeople for the Israeli military, which are either English or Scottish or Australian or wherever they come from, which is never talked about. I mean, it never raises any doubts about, but this is a different subject. It talks about the nature of the Israeli society. But apart from that, you always have interviews with those people, explaining in depth about the reasoning for the Israeli operation, denying that the crimes are taking place, emphasizing that they take care of civilians and stuff like that. And they get ample space. I haven't heard a conversation in a major media like that with Abu Obeida, for example, the spokesman for the military wing of Hamas. Because obviously Hamas, in the eyes of the West, and especially in the eyes of the Western media, is a terrorist organization, is an illegitimate, dangerous organization. They're terrorists and we won't talk to them. So, I mean, that's the whole point of designation of terrorism for somebody. That's the whole point, moving them out of the equation, and you only have one side left. So this is another, and another tool, for example, what the media is doing is maybe even a bit more subtle on the level of terminology, which I think is extremely important. And just the typical example is, for example, the question of hostages versus prisoners. You have Israeli hostages that are held in Gaza, and then you have Palestinian prisoners which are held in Israeli prisons, which are talked maybe 5% of the time in comparison with the hostages, or even less. But this terminology makes it seem as though their imprisonment is legitimate, is completely normal, and you have due course, and you have they have legal recourse, and everything is done according to some rules. And on the other side, you have like this barbaric, wild taking of hostages, which is completely uncivilized. So this discrepancy, just by using one word, hostages and prisoners, is a typical one. And examples like this are really, I mean, you can see them in every article. But the main point I would maybe, and I would finish and give the word to Kristina, I would say, when we think about the differences between the media portrayal of the Israeli or the Palestinian side, I think it's crucial to understand that the Israeli narrative is the norm. That is the norm for the media. Israeli narrative, that is the accepted, there is a consensus about this, and this is a normal position. This is like a neutral position. And the Palestinian position is the deviant position. It's the one that deviates, and then you have to defend it, and you have to struggle with the editor to represent Palestinian narrative, and you get labeled as an activist and stuff like that. Well, when you portray Israeli narrative, that's just common basic journalism, and you can't argue with that. So this is one of the problems.
Okay. Thank you very much. It will be a bit difficult to follow up on this because a lot of it has been said. For me, I think part of what this year has shown is also connected to something you have organized at Pokarna Magdalene's Foundation, the events that actually look critically to media reporting in Palestine. And it's connected with what you mentioned before and what Abir also said, because I actually wasn't aware, even as a journalist, that the bias is so big and it has been going on for so long. So there is research mostly about the American media that shows that already for the first intifada, so between 87 and 93, the reporting was very clearly on the side of Israel, whether it was, so I think one of the researchers one of the analyses looked at the reporting by NPR, the American radio, and out of 10 deaths, they reported 8 deaths of Israelis, but only 3 when it came to Palestinian victims. So, and although there were much more Palestinians killed, the impression was that Israeli somehow, carried bigger burden. That there was more violence, and also the mentioned Mohammed al-Masri in 2009, he already made another analysis where he also emphasized how Palestinian violence is always portrayed as something barbaric and unsensible and doesn't make sense, while Israeli, it's basically they're forced to be violent. It's their defense. They're trying to be humane. So this kind of, and it goes now for decades. This has somehow been going on. And Mona Shalabi made the analysis from 7th of October till 4th of November last year. And she also emphasized how the Israeli victims were, people with names. They were brothers, sisters, husbands, sons, while Palestinians weren't. They were just numbers. Yeah? And for me, it's interesting talking about this today because we actually experienced the problem of just naming all the Palestinian victims because it's 40,000 plus, and it takes a really long time. And I think here it's also a problem today of just, something that media likes to do, like getting one Palestinian voice and one Israeli and saying, now we're balanced, everything is okay. And forgetting on the whole dimensions that have been going on for years now also of occupation and of the system of apartheid. So you can't really balance it. You can't call it a conflict. We can call it occupation, we can call it colonialism, we can call it settler colonialism, apartheid. There are many expressions, but conflict is not one of them, or is not, I think, appropriate. And here I would also touch upon something that Abir mentioned, this talking points used by Israel, repeated by the media. And for me, what's been frustrating, following, mostly maybe also foreign media, is that Gaza has disappeared from news. And it's every time, every day, it's hard to somehow face that. And it's somehow a refuge to go to Al Jazeera, where they still cover it, or Middle East Eye, where they also report on it daily. But otherwise, it's just, it's Taylor Swift, or it's something else, or it's absurd, or something happens in Russia, Trump says something. But this normalization is also connected with something else that I think is also very important and has been already researched and highlighted, that the media doesn't somehow emphasize the illegality of what Israel is doing. So human shields, even if they're used, it has to be, if you can't just shoot the civilian. Yeah? And I think another point where we were talking before also with Abir is today when we talk about north of Gaza, what Israel is doing, ethnically cleansing the territory, the idea behind it is, and I think this is also something that media reports in one way or another, is that civilians had a chance to leave. So everybody who's left there now are now not civilians anymore. Somehow they're connected with Hamas, even if they're really old and they can't move out of their house. It doesn't matter. And I think, so the journalists just report that. They don't put it into the context of international law, of illegality, and it's the same when it comes to, for example, Palestinian refugees. They don't, or very rarely, they say that the rights of Palestinian refugees have been recognized, have been written in international law. The problem is that it's not being enforced, that Israel has for decades just disregarded this. So I think, I would maybe emphasize these points for the beginning. I also think that what has happened in the last year, and it was interesting, just yesterday I talked with an art historian who he lived and researched in America and in Germany, and he said that last year has just made him, turn away from the media that he has followed or he had followed before, because he can't read German media anymore because it's so obviously biased and he doesn't trust it anymore. At the same time, I think it's something that often when we talk about solidarity with Palestine and Palestinian struggle and why is it important also to somehow be part of it, and because it's greater than in a way just Palestine. It somehow, I think, shows also problems in the media itself, because what we have been mentioning now, about the reporting and how the journalists follow only the Israeli narrative, I think even if we look at the questions of, workers' struggle, very often the journalists will happily follow or, copy-paste or summarize the position of the owners, of the capital, of the government, and very rarely will they take time or give the same space to the workers, to their voices, because it's more difficult, it takes more time, you have to establish some kind of trust. So it is a question of power relations and what does democracy mean and who does media represent, and who do journalists, or whose voices do journalists want to give voice to and space to.
Yeah, you have, all three of you have opened many new things that we can research to this conversation. I would just like to add, and because here in Slovenia we maybe consider ourselves a bit luckier in comparison to US or UK or Germany regarding the reporting, but still if there weren't the two of you and maybe a few others, we wouldn't have any reliable information. But what I was thinking now, Kristino, while you were mentioning sanctions and what the International Court of Justice or International Criminal Court of Justice the decrees, the decisions they made, there are also in Slovenian media mostly reported as, so these decisions were made, however they are not obligatory. And this is not true. They are obligatory. They are not sanctions, but they are obligatory. So this is one thing that I think is very prevalent in Slovenian media, for example, that they always try to lessen the importance of the decisions made. But maybe because Abir, you are basically part of your work is that you on daily basis have to go through Israeli media and then deconstruct the news and the information. But what would be the key functions of Israeli propaganda? And maybe also then again the question for all. So why are the mainstream media, Western mainstream media, why are they're sourcing Israeli sources? Why are they so reliant on Israeli sources?
Okay, I'll try. So, in general, the Israeli propaganda has a few pillars, which is one, they of course portray themselves as part of the West, and only democracy in the Middle East, and their work, they are fighting. I remember when Netanyahu said we are the sons of light and they are the sons of darkness. So this is the base, this is one of the key functions of Israeli propaganda, is that they portray themselves as like the light, fighting the barbarians, fighting the dark, etc. To playing on the Islamophobic sentiments and racism in the West. So they are the victims, they are the Western, there is the only democracy, they have the most moral army. I think all of this propaganda has failed, collapsed, I believe. Not in the eyes of the Western media, the most powerful media outlets, but in the different parts of the world. And I think this is the masses that matter. What also, so this propaganda has also arms of oppression, because they are extending everywhere, and they have lobby groups, they have powerful groups that they work to pressure everywhere, and this is not just the Israeli, I mean, this is not just the Zionist enterprise, it's the Western enterprise, it's the capitalist, it's the imperialist enterprise that are working hand in hand with the Zionism, because they see that this Zionism project, imperialist project in the Middle East. This is the way they block any quest for freedom in the Middle East, any quest for democracy in the Middle East, for real freedom from domination over production modes and over our resources, and etc. So they work hand in hand. So it's not the Zionist propaganda per se, it's also like the Western imperialist interest. So they work hand in hand to oppress and to control the media or the narrative in the media. But I want to emphasize, because we tend to think that it's just that the journalists are controlled by those interests, and they are not able to do differently, and they are afraid to lose their jobs, etc., etc. I don't think this is the only case. I don't think it's a problem of self-censorship and cooperation controlling the media, and that's it. Because those journalists are also people, right? They are not machines like marionettes. And I believe that there is, and we have seen this over the last year, and also before, there is an inherent bias in these journalists. So that's also like answering your second question. There is few things. So one, of course, there is a pressure, and there are organizations powerful, and money, and profit, and etc., and control, and people powerful, etc. But journalists have inherent bias, and by now, over a year, they see what we see. I don't think they don't see what we all see. And they still having the same practices. So that explains that it's not just about control, it's also about they choose intentionally, consciously to cover the genocide in this way. The other thing that I believe is that what happened on October 7th was seen as an attack on the white privilege. And they feel it was an attack on their white privilege as well, because they identify so much with the Zionist project that they feel it was an attack on their white privilege. And they now, from this perspective of power, they want to smash everyone who says no to them, who raise their head. And they believe it's their power as well. They have to help Israel. They have to empower Israel. They have to, be servants of the Israeli war, of the Israeli genocide, because this is their war. They consider it's their war against anyone who challenges our privilege as white people, as Westerners. So I think all these together explain why, after a year, that they have been criticized and exposed, and the bias exposed, and there were protests, and even internal protests. Like, there are people from within who are trying to change this, but they are unable. It explains also how they, explains all the things we have mentioned, but also like how they are willing to get out of their way to shield Israel from accountability. I mean, all these concept of a bullet found its way into a girl's body, like explaining something like a crime that happened in Gaza, or dehydrating to death, or like the other day there was a title in the New York Times about a boy that is amputated in both hands, and the title was Surviving Gaza. I mean, he didn't survive Gaza, he survived the genocide, he survived Israel's bombing, but no mention of Israel in the title. So many examples of this. That is not, it's intentional. People sit literally in the newsroom and think of titles and do efforts and become so creative with titles in order to shield Israel from accountability. And that explains that it's not malpractice. It's not, they don't know otherwise. They know what they are doing, and they are doing intentionally.
when you said in a way critically that Israel views itself as part of the West, I think I agree with Israel in that point. I mean, they are part of, in my opinion, they are the face of the true West. I mean, the West that matters in the end. It goes all the way back to Theodor Herzl, the father of political Zionism at the end of 19th century, where in his seminal book, The Jewish State, where he lays the groundwork for the establishment of Israel as a Jewish state in quite fascinating details, even though it's a very short book. He says that Israel will represent an outpost of the West against either Asian hordes or Asian barbarians, something like that. So this is the language that he used. And this I think this underlines the basic point without which we cannot understand how the media portrays the question of Palestine, and that's racism. I mean, if we don't take into account the framework of racism, we won't understand why the journalists are doing this. That's what I mean when I say Israeli narrative is the norm. That's our narrative. This is the Western narrative of progressive, LGBT-friendly country, even though it's not, but nevertheless, in our fantasy, it exists as an LGBT-friendly country, a progressive country where you have trans festivals.
Everyone is vegan.
Yeah, people are vegan, and you have women in the military, and it's like it's a fairy tale of a country. I mean, surrounded by vicious savages. And Josep Borrell, for example, the High Representative of the European Union, until I think this Sunday, when he will be changed by an even worse representative, Kaja Kallas. He said maybe a year ago or something like that, he said that the EU represents like a well-managed garden surrounded by a jungle. And I mean, it's so blatant, this racism, thinking about people from outside as like savages and like weed, and we are the well-established and very nice, and the garden with the cut grass and with the flowers and stuff like that. And this is how Israel views itself in comparison to the Arabs. It has so because of Zionism for 150 years, almost, and this is how the West views it. By defending Israel, if we just disregard the geopolitical, side of it, I think culturally and socially, when the West and the Western media defend Israel, they defend themselves. They know that they defend Europe and they defend the United States, not in the sense that they think, not in the sense of defending it against terrorism, but they defend their own image of superior, democratic, progressive forces against the homophobic, misogynistic, vicious terrorist Arabs. And we are so much indoctrinated with this racism through pop culture, for example, through just look at the movies. Look at how the movies portray the Arabs and the Muslims since at least 80s and even before. And what were for example, the Native Americans before in the 50s or the 60s and even before? Then you have the Arabs and of course the African Americans. So this white supremacy is so blatant and the line is so clear, and it cuts through this question of Palestine, and we have to take this into account. If we don't, we won't understand how the media can do what it does. And just one last point, one of the tools that the Israeli propaganda is using is, I think, one of the most just
vicious.
Yeah, vicious, and just really it's kind of a low life argument, very detrimental to Jews. It's this weaponization of anti-Semitism. Just equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, that's like one of the central pillars of Israeli propaganda, because if you delegitimize Zionism, you delegitimize, just the very concept of Israel as a Jewish state, which should be delegitimized. Because it's a racist concept, having a state for one ethnic / religious group having more rights than any other groups in that region. And it's so blatant, it's so obvious that even such mainstream organizations as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, you have Al-Haq, you have other Palestinian organizations, and B'Tselem from Israel, which are all well-established organizations, non-controversial, I think, in any way. and they have all adopted this language of apartheid because it's in your face. I mean, you can't unsee it. When you see it, you can't unsee it. If you've been to the West Bank, I mean, you don't have to be there, but if you're there, it's so obvious. You literally have streets in Hebron where Palestinians cannot step on those streets. I mean, literally, they cannot step. I saw a street which is divided by, you know, those plastic things that you divide, for example, the bicycle lane from the automobile way, and you have like the plastic division on the street. For example, 2 meters of the street is on one side and 5 meters on the other, and the Palestinian side is the narrower side. So it's just so petty. It's so petty and so banal and so vicious in how it manifests itself. And when you see it, I mean, obviously there isn't another language that you can use. But the problem is that the media and journalists, and I think we shouldn't talk only about media as like an abstract concept or an abstract industry. You have concrete journalists and concrete editors that, like you said, I mean, they put effort into thinking various rhetorical devices, how to diminish the guilt of Israel and how to spread the guilt around, like everybody's, you know, the region, it's very difficult and stuff like that. But the media the Western media I think it's incapable of thinking about Israel. What it does, it fantasizes about Israel. And New York Times is like, it's such a chef's kiss. It's a perfect example. You don't, I mean, BBC is good in that regard. I mean, it's okay to understand, but New York Times, it's perfect. After the beginning of destruction of Gaza, so I think in late October or beginning of November or something like that, the New York Times, which is, I think, the most influential print newspaper in the world. I mean, it used to set the agenda. Now, with the demise of legacy media, I think it's less and less. But still, it's a hugely important media. They published an op-ed, the editorial op-ed. So it's like it represents the position of the newspaper, not the position of a certain editor, of a columnist or a journalist. It represents the viewpoint of the media itself. And they wrote in a lengthy op-ed, so after the beginning of the destruction of Gaza, I think at that point there were like 500 or several hundred children already dead in the bombardment. They wrote, Israel, I quote, Israel is fighting to defend a society that values life and international law. I think this is like a literal quote, something like that, very close to it. And in the editorial board was capable of writing that, of defending life after 500 killed children, and defending and like saying that Israel defends international law, not only after the beginning of the destruction of Gaza, but after decades and decades and decades of illegal occupation. So I mean, you cannot disregard this if you're not a racist. You have to be racist in some level to be able to write that. And it's a fantasy world that the Western media created, first about Israel and also about themselves. So when they lie about Israel, they lie to themselves about themselves. It's a very perplexed and complex issue. Yeah.
Can I just say exactly, and that's why they are so careful with not saying genocide, with shielding Israel from accountability, from any not talking about what Israel is doing, is because if they incriminate Israel, they incriminate themselves. So they will do everything they can to shield Israel from incriminating, because it's them. They will see themselves in the mirror, so they won't do that to themselves.
Well, for me it was really interesting to listen to this, because I mean, for me it's always enlightening to read also what Boris writes, because I think he's so clearly not racist. So I think there are still voices that exist in the media and that have perhaps even gained on prominence in the last year or in the last years. I think that there is more critical reading of this and perception, but maybe I'm also just with the rosy glasses looking into the world and not in contact with enough people from all walks of life. However, I mean, if I also return to something that Boris before said about Israel and the question of Israeli sources and the BBC and how the journalists try to represent almost the Israeli government or their advocate. I think that we should be aware that Israel or Israeli representatives are very good at voicing their opposition, at saying this is wrong, or even threatening a lawsuit and so. And I think this is part of it. I think this shows this fear, and that they know if they're not going to say that, then there's going to be an official letter coming to their editor, and the editor is going to be really angry with them. So this is somehow I don't know. This is my attempt to understand why they do that, but maybe I'm wrong. And I think this is just something to be aware, in the sense of where there is maybe a point where certain pressure can be exerted on the media, so that it doesn't mean that we have to become as vicious or use the nasty ways that Israel does. But I think it is important that journalists inside the media houses, but also the audience, voices the criticism and the double standards or the racist reporting that they see. I think this is, and often I think we stay quiet. We're really angry, we talk among each other, but very rarely do we write letters saying that this is wrong, this should be corrected in the media. And when it comes to Zionism, I think it's also something that I don't know how much it's been debated globally, but I think it's been raised lately again, that Zionism was recognized as racism, I think for more than a decade, officially by the UN, by the General Assembly resolution, and it was the condition of Israel to join the peace talks in Madrid and then later in Oslo, that this resolution was then cancelled or done away with. So it was clearly stated by the UN, by the majority of member states, that Zionism is a form of racism. And I think this is also something that's being forgotten, or that media, perhaps journalists even don't know about. And it's also, for me, it was interesting also talking with international lawyers, with professors. Sometimes it was the feeling that, well, but let's not delve into that. That's past. So Zionism was termed as racism in the 60s, in the 70s. Now let's look onwards somehow. But I think this is actually the key issue and the key question. And I think also here, what maybe was felt even before, that the governments or the authorities are further and further away from the people and what they feel and what they want. It's also now the media. The media is not getting closer to the people and voicing, their feelings or their needs and their demands, but it's getting closer to the established powers, I think. And that's super problematic, because people just then don't trust. They don't trust the media, they don't trust the government. And we see, I think, also in the interview that Boris made with the foreign minister, it seems they don't understand certain things, like the basics of the problem. And then it's also a question, do they not understand it, or they just decide not to understand it? What's the problem of Israel as a Jewish state? Why it cannot be a Jewish and a democratic state? Because it privileges the Jewish population and discriminates all other citizens who are not Jewish. So I think this is something that is becoming more and more obvious and highly problematic when people understand in a way the situation better than the representatives or than the journalists and the media who are supposedly trying to explain certain topics. And I think there's just a lot of this kind of putting people down, or just believing they're dumb or that they can be easily manipulated. to a certain extent, a certain group of people for sure, but I think less and less. So.
Yeah, thank you, Kristino, for making this bridge towards the governments, because this was one of my questions. So yeah, the media, and we already have spoken about this with you and Boris before, that the media now is closer to the government and represents or repeats what the government says, and not basically not monitoring the government, but being the spokesperson for the government. And this is, of course, very clear now in this case. And maybe, Boris, if you tell us more about this specific interview. I'm not sure how many people have read the interview with Foreign Minister Tanja Fajon, because what is also interesting is how the representatives of the government try when speaking about Gaza, try to distinguish themselves, or they try to create two different persons. So one is I'm prime minister or a foreign minister, and the other is me, Tanja Fajon, because this was very blatant when you were speaking to her. And maybe then Abir, because Germany now must be quite a horrible place to live. How is the connection between the media, German media, and the government in Germany?
I wouldn't want to talk about the interview. I mean, if you read the interview, it's not so. Yeah, I mean, but just the problem I see with Tanja Fajon is that she, I think, and this is like psychoanalyzing her, which I don't want to do, but just for the fun of it, I think she sincerely believes in her own words. I mean, I think she's sincere in thinking how she does this. She's fighting on behalf of the Palestinians, and not on behalf of the Palestinians, but on behalf of the truth and justice and progressive and peace, obviously, above anything else, and social justice. And I think she's sincere in that. And I posed her a couple of questions that I think are crucial, because I haven't seen them in other media. One was if she sees any problem in identifying as a Jewish state, and what does she think it means. And obviously she doesn't understand, because she kept talking about how it's not a problem if a state is Jewish or Muslim, and it's not a religious conflict. And it's interesting because the punchline is correct. I mean, it's not a religious conflict, but the analysis in her eyes, in her mind, the analysis behind it is completely wrong. I mean, she doesn't understand what the question of Jewish state is all about. And I asked her a couple of questions about the resistance and how does Slovenia support the armed resistance of the Palestinians, and which, if there is any armed group among the Palestinians that is legitimate in the eyes of Slovenia to support either physically or just politically. And she was visibly shocked by this question. I mean, it wasn't very obvious, but she was taken aback a bit by what the are you asking? And can you repeat the question? And I had to repeat the question. So it was an interesting thing. But I think she lives in this liberal bubble where they are so convinced of their own moral superiority that they are incapable of thinking against their own position. And so, I mean, just this, the basic framework to understand the question eludes them. I mean, they're not capable of grasping it, and they don't want to. And they think this is the, and I'll just finish with this. I think this leads to the how do you say, slepa ulica, the dead end of two-state solution. And I think they really think that by recognizing, because she oftentimes in the interview she emphasized how Slovenia has recognized Palestine, as if this is like a real concrete action that is needed nowadays to end the genocide and all that's going on. And she's not dealing with the realities of the thing. She's content with the superficial so-called progressive position, and that's it. We tick the box. That's it. So what else do you want us to do? I mean, we recognize Palestine. And it's a dead end, I think, because it doesn't address, and I tried to talk to her about this, but it doesn't address the question of the root problem, which is the dispossession of Palestinians in '48. I mean, this is the crucial point. the expulsion of Palestinians and the dispossession of Palestinians. And as long as this question is not addressed, there won't be peace or quote unquote in that region. I mean that's the basic question, and it cuts through the racist idea of Israel. I mean it's for us, it's not for them. I mean the Israeli government literally says in when it took power in December of 2022, I think. They said literally that their main, they listed like a couple of main principles that will guide the work of the government. And I think that number one or number two is that the so-called land of Israel, so not the state of Israel, but the land of Israel, which encompasses not only the internationally recognized borders of Israel, which Israel itself doesn't recognize, but it also encompasses Gaza, East Jerusalem, West Bank, parts of Egypt, parts of Jordan, parts of Syria, and maybe even part of Lebanon. I'm not sure about that. But, so they say, and this is a literal quote, the land of Israel belongs exclusively to the Jewish people. This is a literal quote of the current Israeli government. And it's not, I mean, this is not a deviation from the Israeli ideology and the Zionist ideology. That's the centerpiece I mean, that's the point on which Israel is centered around. So, and the politicians, I mean, I don't blame Tanya Fayon for not understanding it, just to be honest. I mean, it's not an easy subject. It takes years of reading and discussing and thinking about this. So the problem is not her not understanding, but I think she's willing to stop 2 steps into this journey. And you need 10 or 15 steps. And she takes 2 or 3 and she says, okay, that's it. We've done our stuff and that's it. And she's proud of that. And that just limits the debate and limits the field of action.
Just 2 comments on this, because I think this mantra of recognition of Palestinian state is very symbolic action that I think makes people comfortable with, because they don't really challenge the Zionist project, they don't really challenge the colonization, they just do a very symbolic thing that actually also Israel is comfortable with, though Israel voices opposition to this, but I don't think they are not comfortable with this, because as long as it's very symbolic and does not challenge their colonialist project, it's fine. They just have to create this facade that they don't like it. And I want to connect it also with what's happening in Gaza, because that's going to be also the next step, is reducing Gaza to a humanitarian crisis. And we have to be very, very, very careful with this, because that is going to be the project of the media now, to just deviate from a political context, because what Gaza needs is freedom and justice and accountability. It does not just need humanitarian aid, it does need humanitarian and a lot of humanitarian aid and a lot of support and volunteering, but it's not just that. And what is going to happen next is that Israel and its allies and the media is going to reduce Gaza into as if it was hit by an earthquake. And we have to be also battling this, and that's very important. So to your question about the German media, I think if there is some facade in the foreign media, in the Western media, because sometimes, you know, they will publish, like we call it, good articles, at least like giving more space to Palestinians, talking about Israeli crimes, etc., etc. And that's, of course, doesn't happen all the time. It happens once in a while because they want to maintain some facade. In German media, they don't need this facade. And they don't even attempt to create this facade. I mean, they are comfortable with that. They write in German. No one around the world reads them. And I think what happens there is that there is, you know, German media is even more enthusiastic about Israel's genocide than even sometimes some articles in Israeli media, to that extent. I mean, there is no way you would see like critical articles in German media. If Germans would rely only on German media, they would know nothing about what's happening in Gaza, let alone justifying everything that is happening, but also informing the politicians, because like there was this mantra repeated so many times about human shields and about Palestinians, and Christina talked about it. This is even not a justification under international law, but somehow the German media had the liberty to justify every crime under this mantra. And the same language they've been using was used by the foreign minister, the German foreign minister, when she had this very, it became really worldwide exposed speech when she talked about like Palestinians lose their, Palestinian civilians are legitimate targets if there is Hamas there or something like that. It was really outrageous speech, but it was exactly what the German media was repeating all the time. So it's like they're working hand in hand with each other. You feel the German media is part of the oppressive system also, because like German media is also like a spy for the police over Palestinian activists or pro-Palestinian voices. So it's really taking a role beyond just covering. It's taking an active role in the oppression apparatus of the German state.
Can I just add something on this question of German media, which is again a good example, and this discussion is full of good examples because this question is so clear-cut. It offers so many good examples. But German media is, when it comes to the question of Israel, it's a caricature of media. I mean, it's not journalism. It's like it's not even. I mean, it's obvious it's propaganda, but it's so. I mean, it's not funny, but it's like farcical. It's like when you look at what they're saying, and it's not just the German media. German politics that's the same. As you said, I mean, it goes hand in hand. A couple of months ago, when there was at I think the Berlinale festival, there was a projection of the Israeli-Palestinian film. I've forgotten. No Other Land. And it had two directors, a Palestinian and an Israeli director, and they were there physically present. I think representing the film or accepting some award. And the public, after the movie was portrayed, I think the public applauded them. And among the public was the culture minister of Germany, which applauded, and it's a courtesy applause, nothing special. But then the media started to problematize why she was clapping for the makers of this movie, which was quote unquote anti-Semitic or whatever. And she said, no, I was only clapping for the Israeli director. So it's so, I mean, it's ridiculous, the levels that they go to. And you had, a lot of times you had like in the German media, I forgot the concrete name, I'm sorry, but either a very influential journalist or editor from one of the big media publicly said that the slogan "From the river to the sea" is equal to Sieg Heil. And and why is Germany a good example? Because again, as I said before, the Western media defends the West when it defends Israel, and Germany defends itself when it defends Israel. I mean, it wants to relieve itself of the burden for the Holocaust by saying that no, we committed the genocide against the Jews, we know what anti-Semitism is, and people are obviously joking about it and saying, oh, you are the experts on anti-Semitism, and I mean, you can define now anti-Semitism for everybody else. But there are very good analysis done by Jewish authors about this discourse on the Holocaust in Germany, where the German society and the German politics, and I think until last year, until October the 7th, it could pass as a good policy towards the question of Holocaust, like denazification, talking about the Holocaust, accepting guilt and stuff like that. And I mean, it could pass. I mean, people were, including me, I thought that Germany was doing something on this question. But then it comes to the question of Israel. And you see, it doesn't have anything to do with the Holocaust. They're talking about the Holocaust in this way, putting it on a pedestal so far away from the society that it's untouchable, it's unchangeable, it's something that is so horrible, unrepeatable, that's the point. So it's not our fault. I mean, it happened in the past, we understand it, we're clean now, we know we know best what's going on and how anti-Semitism is the problem. And in doing so, they sanction the Jewish voices that are critical towards Israeli narrative or the German narrative. And they're, in a way, reproducing anti-Semitism by denouncing anti-Semitism. So in that sense, it's a good example. One of I don't know if he's most famous, but one of the famous Jewish activists, Israeli activists in Germany, Udi Raz, I don't know if you heard him. He's very eloquent on this. I mean, he says that the point of the German discourse on Israel is actually Islamophobic. So they support the Jews in Germany as long as they denounce Muslims as anti-Semitic. And you had, like, for example, the German president Frank-Walter Steinmeier saying literally that the German state demands or expects of Germans of Arab origin. That was the phrase he used. I mean, talking about Nazi terminology, but he said citizens of Arab origin have to distance themselves from Hamas, have to denounce Hamas and distance themselves from anti-Semitism. And clearly Germany is trying to push the question of anti-Semitism from the far right and from I mean, it completely, the whole society and politics and media is full of that. But they want to push that onto the shoulder of the Arabs and the Muslims, and again, in this Orientalist fashion, look, it's those savages and barbarians that are guilty for our sins. So we're clean, we're good, it's them, they're the backward ones. So in that sense, Germany is like a very good, fun example.
We stay a little bit on the question of German media. The Intercept has done an investigative research that showed that the Axel Springer publishing group, media publishing group, has been basically contributing to human rights abuses and land grabbing in the occupied Palestinian territory, because they have an Israeli subsidiary that operates the ads platform called Yad 2, where they were promoting the buying of the land for the settlers, and they even promoted it using the words from the river to the sea. And now we have 5 Palestinian plaintiffs who are trying to, and they filed a legal complaint against this, so it's that bad.
Yeah.
However, I have a question, because in the past we have seen that media has been held accountable for inciting genocide. We have the Julius Streicher, publisher from the Sturmer during the Second World War. He was sentenced to death because he was publishing articles, and the sentence was incitement to murder and extermination. And also in the 1990s, we had the International Criminal Court, a tribunal for Rwanda, that convicted 3 media personalities for their role in inciting the Rwanda genocide. But do we think, is this possible still today? And does the media know that they can be held accountable?
Yeah, I don't think so. They think they are above the law, like Israel thinks. I think that's also something that many of us are trying to work on. I think first the archiving is very important, and those analyses, there are plenty of analysis being done. I can speak about many examples, as you said, like German media and what is happening in Germany can really take hours of our, we have so many examples, but I can think also of German media and journalists who clearly incited to genocide, who clearly cheered for genocide, and that's really ink on paper that we should be dealing with this. So I think, like, I remember one of the titles by one of Axel Springer news outlets, like, "Long Live the IDF." This was an actual title. I also remember an article, opinion article, that someone said, it's right for Israel to be safe, it has to make the region ashes and dust. So there were a lot of, plenty of examples in the German media where there was a direct legion of the genocide, a direct cheering for the genocide. And yes, I think at some point we have to take them into account, we have to hold them accountable. I think that would require a lot of work, but that part of the accountability that we are seeking and will be seeking in the next few years. And of course, in some cases, because it's in some cases, like, and as I said, there are some facade that they are maintained. Maybe it's not direct, like very direct, clear phrases of inciting for the genocide, but I mean allowing the genocide to happen in the bigger framework and the understanding the media role. It is first of all justifying the genocide, but also shielding Israel from accountability by repeating everything and taking everything that Israel said as the fact, and really not taking its responsibility and being ethical in covering the genocide. I think there is a lot of there is a fertile ground for this, for us to be working on the media, and I think holding media accountable, not only legally, is also important. I mean, in terms of us, the people, holding those news outlets accountable is also very, very, very important and a key for our to continue, to move forward with accountability. And people are already doing that. First of all, shaming them, archiving what they are doing, unsubscribing, protesting, sending letters, doing protests, and many people are doing that, protesting in front of their offices. There are also internal, we know that some journalists are trying to do something from the inside, but they are also leaking information about how they are functioning internally. All these elements are also part of holding them accountable.
I don't think anybody will be held accountable, but that's just me. That's just my character. I mean, when France says that it won't abide by the ICC arrest warrant, I mean, for somebody as uncontroversial as Benjamin Netanyahu as war criminal, I mean, obviously he's a war criminal. By definition, every Israeli prime minister, at least since '67, is a war criminal simply by building settlements. Just by that metric, everybody is a war criminal. But nothing will happen. Let alone journalists or media. I don't think they will even come. I mean, it would be nice to have some processes and some legal challenges for that, but I don't think it's going to happen, and I think everybody knows that it's not going to happen. So, because if the West, if for example the German courts or any other European court would step in this direction, I mean, it would, I think, inevitably lead to the foundation of Western political system, and I think, I mean, they are aware of this, so they won't do that. I mean, if they don't want to hold Benjamin Netanyahu accountable, why would they hold accountable some journalists from Dresden or I don't know? I mean, his importance is 0.1%, so it's not going to happen, I think. And just one more thing, because I wanted to, when you mentioned Rwanda and you mentioned the Nazis. I mean, the Nazis weren't, before they became allies, they were official enemies. I mean, then they became allies they were adopted into NATO. Like the chief of staff of the Nazi army under Hitler became the highest military figure in NATO. Adolf Heusinger, I think was his name. And you have various other Nazi scientists that they became crucial for the Western technological advance after the Second World War. So before they became our official allies, not official, but allies, they were obviously official enemies, and that makes it much more easier to hold somebody accountable. And Rwanda, in that sense, Rwanda is not important. That's why they could be held accountable in the eyes of the West, I think. But Israel is another case, because as some U.S. senators like Lindsey Graham and others and other politicians correctly say, they say, after Israel, the U.S. is next. If the ICC can prosecute Israel, I mean, what else? They're going to prosecute us. Yes, I think they understand this. So it's not. I don't think it's going to happen.
I have to say I strongly disagree. But that's just me, I guess. No, but I think I'll quote, I think Tracy Chapman has a song, and she says that the tables are turning, or that at one point the tables will turn. I also think that, I mean...
When is that song?
You had your time coming. Okay. The fact that this already happened, I think, is a very strong indication that, you know, we, in a way, have to have, if nothing else, hope or leave the possibility that this is going to happen. I think it was probably really difficult for, I don't know, people in concentration camps to imagine that something is going to change. It was really difficult for the Tutsis who were being killed, that, you know, people are going to be held accountable. And I think Rwanda, although it's in the middle of Africa, it does hold a strategic position, just as Israel does, because it has become like a spot where America has put its information stations and everything to somehow control the region. So I think it's not that unimportant, and I think these examples and cases do show, you know, in a way how things can be different. Yes, then things change and it's a process, and perhaps, you know, the centers of power do not completely crumble and fall apart. But for me personally, I think it's also, I hate talking too much about what is going to happen in the future, because I think it's really important to just keep things open, in the sense that you never really know what's going to affect something, and for sure the system as it exists now doesn't want any kind of accountability, doesn't want us to believe that the impossible is possible. And I think I personally almost feel that I have to believe that it is. Just in the sense of not being somehow closed into the system that we are in at the moment. When we talked about being held to account, something that for me is interesting is, I think many media today are afraid of Israel, you know, holding them to account, or Israel punishing them if they publish certain articles or, you know, do something. For example, they banned Al Jazeera from operating in Israel. Now they have, I think, banned Haaretz as any kind of interlocutor for any ads or anything because of negative reporting. And I think also probably I think Israel has this ability, or has proven that it doesn't have problems to sue newspaper because of anti-Semitism. You know, journalists, I think a really old journalist said something negative on the this lawn of the White House at one moment, and she had to step down. And I won't remember her name, but it was somehow symbolic. At one moment, it was probably, well, I won't even go there.
She was talking about how they should go back, or
yeah, I don't. It was
coming from Europe to Palestine.
Possibly, yeah. So I think, and I think this fear also of the Israeli lobby, or, you know, what can happen, or the ads that are going to, I think a lot of it works in a way like self-censorship works. And for sure, you know, it's worth checking, you know, with whom you have signed contracts and how do they connect, and who, I don't know, who offers the security for the state apparatus or the computer systems and something like that. So that you know, but this is the work of official agencies, and we pay people for that, to take care of that. So I don't think on the level of a state that this should be our worry. On the level of a private company, if that's a media, they should also have this kind of stuff covered, and know, and most of all ensure that they are independent and that they're not afraid of a certain, you know, lobby group in one way or another. And I think one case that is worth mentioning, and that was written a lot about, is the case of these podcasts that were, or at least I know about them, and probably there are even worse cases of two guys who had a podcast, and they were, saying how, if they could, or if they went to Gaza, everybody would already be dead or something like that. So I think that's clear incitement, and I think it's worth pursuing some kind of I mean, it's always a problem. What Boris mentioned before, it's a system. We're dealing with decades of this. So these are just the examples of bad apples, but sometimes these are needed for the system to start to change, for the realization for the Israeli society also to come that what they have been doing, the project that they believe in, that they live, is in its basis racist and wrong and criminal. And that, yes, they will have to, in a way, I mean, International Court of Justice said that some kind of restitution for the land taken, for the refuge that people have lived for decades, that this will have to be restituted, that there will have to be some kind of giving back. And I think we just have to keep on, repeating and demanding that, because that is a very firm basis. It doesn't hold. It's not covered by tanks, but by justice, and I think what we all know that it's right.
Yeah, I have to talk about the accountability, because I truly believe that it's one of the crucial things that we need to be working on in the next few years probably. And I do actually believe that there will be accountability if we think about the world in different perception, because we tend to think about the world as this powerful 5-6 powers that dominate us and dominate the world, and we think that they are the world, but they are not actually, and we have to remind ourselves they are not. What is happening now, there is a worldwide movement all over the world, in every corner. The thing is that many people are realizing that it's not just about Palestine. It is not just about Palestine. What is happening today in Gaza, it's about everyone. It's about people's freedoms, it's about economic independence. They don't want a free Palestine because they know that free Palestine means freedom from capitalism and imperialism, and it will spread in the region and it will spread in other places, and they don't want that. They want to smash everyone who raises their head. It is about climate justice, it is about women's rights, it is about children's rights, it is about economic independence, it is about a lot of things, democracy, free speech, etc. It's about everything, and everything is connected. And I think if we tend to think about this, if we think about this in those terms, then accountability will be there. If we tend to think that we are weak and these 5 countries will continue to dominate our lives, then nothing will happen. So it really depends on what we do in the next few years. This is going to be a movement that we will turn into global, powerful movement across nations, intersectional, etc., or we are going to go back to business as usual very soon. So it is a question that posed to us, and we have to answer this question. I truly believe that if we connect all the movements that are happening, so many people are doing so many things, like on legal aspects, on economic aspects, on human rights aspect, archiving, boycotting, art, culture, academia, etc. And if we connect all these struggles, we are truly able to create a powerful movement against those powers. And we have to remind ourselves that empires fell in the past. We have to remember Vietnam, for example. We have to remember South Africa. It's inevitable. I think freedom and justice is inevitable. It might take time, but it all depends on us. What we do now, today, and tomorrow.
is there maybe also like a stone in this mosaic of what we can do? Also, this that now more and more people are following what is going on social media and basically see the contrast between the reporting in the Western media, especially the corporations, and what you can see from people, ordinary people, or Palestinian journalists still in Gaza reporting directly. And do you think that this contrast that the people see is so big that can help incite more and more rebellion? This is also a question for everyone. Yeah, but
Yeah, okay. I want to believe that something has changed in this year. I truly want to believe, because I know that it has changed a lot of people around me. Forever, I want to believe. And I want to believe that everything we've seen would really, for every normal human being, would change something. So, but the question is, to what extent people are going to take what they have seen into or translate it into action and consistency, because that's what matters, consistency. And I truly believe that every one of us can have a role in the struggle. It's global, it's not just about Palestine. So every one of us can have a role. It might be small, it might be big, but there is something for all of us to do. And the optimist in me wants to believe that this was a turning point in history. And if it's so, I think change is inevitable.
Regarding the social media accounts and reporting that goes on there, obviously I think it's crucial nowadays, because it just contrasts the reality, just the brutal reality of what's going on in Gaza with the sanitized media reports that are going on. And I often think lately, I'm aware of the shock value of, for example, images of dead children. And how this value basically is very short term, maybe, because if you repeat it, you desensitize the people about this question, just on the image level. But nevertheless, I wonder if, for example, the big television, the corporate televisions, the public televisions and the public websites such as my own, I wonder if it would be prudent and good for the debate to post, I don't know, the most horrific images on television in the prime time news section and on the websites, because again, the images we see from Gaza are so, they're so transformative that you can't post them, but you can't forget them. And a lot of, I think, I don't know if the majority, but a very big part of society is not on social media. Older people are not so much on social media, as at least not on Instagram and on Twitter, as much as maybe younger or middle-aged generations. And I wonder how that would affect the whole debate and the framework of the debate. If we see, for example, if you would see the picture, and I'm sorry, I'll be graphic, but just for a second, I saw a picture, a video of a child, very small child, with his head literally split open. Literally split open. And I immediately thought about the scene from Terminator 2. And I don't want to make this a funny story, but just to make a point, there is a scene where the evil Terminator, which is like a metal that can change shape, attacks Sarah Connor and the good Terminator, and the good Terminator shoots like with the shotgun directly into his face, and his head splits open, like the metal is like splits open. And literally the same image coming from Gaza with like a real child. And I wonder how that would affect the whole debate. If you see this, can you still pretend not to know what's going on? I think we still can pretend to not know what's going on. And just the point I'm trying to make is that social media accounts are crucial in this. And obviously, Palestinian journalists in Gaza are just the primary source. So Al Jazeera does a very excellent job, because it has a network of journalists still, even in the north of Gaza, they still report, even though their family were killed or they themselves were targeted, or they know they will be targeted. I think about 190 journalists so far have been killed in Gaza alone in 1 year. Just for example, the social media accounts, they can provide an image, they can provide a narrative, they can provide a glimpse into reality that the mainstream media doesn't want to. But the media, if it wants to do their job, it's their job to analyze this and to offer a context to this. I mean, we cannot demand of people with TikTok accounts to just be international jurists or diplomats or politicians or military experts. It's the role of the media to contextualize all of this. So there is still space for the media to take into account the reality and like use it and analyze it. And I don't think that's the job of social media. That's just the only difference I would like to make.
I have to say I don't follow much the social media actually. And for me, I think the last year was also in a way insightful in terms of showing how much not freedom or how much obstacles there is also in the social media, how much censorship and how not free these platforms are, especially when it comes to the topic of Palestine. But I don't want to reduce their importance. I know that they're absolutely important and many people follow them. I still stick to usually the media portals and stuff like that. I agree with the graphics. I also agree very much with the fact that if you use them too often, they desensitize. And but yeah, there are also, I think, images or just descriptions of images that are, I continue to have in my mind. But at the same time, I'm sometimes afraid that these images can be so shocking, and it's so obvious to people that this shouldn't be happening, that they actually produce an opposite effect in the sense of helplessness, and then because of this feeling of helplessness, people turning away from it because it's so horrible, it's too horrible to bear, it's too horrible to read again and again every day. So yeah, I think in this sense it's also really important to give voice to people who continue to live in Gaza, who continue to survive, to be clear on who bears responsibility, to take certain steps that this can end, so that it is not hopeless, because it's not. It's very clear that this is not a natural catastrophe. This is human-made, and humans can stop it. So in this sense, I think it's also a role of the media to help people understand where are the triggers, where are these lines of power, pressure, that something can change. I think the really problematic part is also when journalists feel too, in a way, hurt by what's happening, and they become either unable to report or see that it's already lost battle, or they become cynical. So I think it doesn't do favor to readers, because I think readers need to understand the system, how the system works, and how they can work to make the system work either differently or more effectively.
Just to comment on the issue of the images, because I think it's very easy for us to theorize this discussion, and I understand it. Before the genocide, we also, Palestinians, had a lot of discussion over images and usage of images. But I have to say that in this genocide we stopped debating, we stopped arguing, and we stopped telling anyone what images to share or not. And I remember someone from Gaza wrote that we will never forgive the world for making us posting photos of our shredded children for someone to listen to us and stop this. And I think that is a very powerful thing. People do not want to share those photos. but the world is being a very dark place that forced people to just plead for something to stop this carnage, to stop just this slaughter, to stop this genocide, that they are using photos. And honestly, I don't blame them. I don't share it myself, but I don't really blame them. It's not them, it's us, the world, that forced them into this. I don't think anyone in the world wants his children, the photos of his children. The last thing the world will see of his children is shredded bodies. But imagine the situation that us failing them has pushed them to.
Yes, thank you for